Welcome to Fractions Part 2. In this video tutorial, you will learn about adding and subtracting fractions. Here is a reminder. Let's look at what a fraction is. A fraction is a numerical quantity that is not a whole number. Here is 3/4. Fractions are made up of several parts. The first part is the numerator, which is the top number right here. The numerator is how many pieces are being considered. That is what the number represents. The second part is the denominator, which is the bottom number, which represents how many congruent or equal pieces the whole is divided into. In this case, it is 4. This is the number of pieces that the whole is divided into. The denominator can never be 0. The third part of a fraction is the dividing bar, which is right in between the two parts, the numerator and the denominator. Try to remember that the denominator is the bottom number, and as denominator starts with D, so does down. So the down number is the denominator. Adding fractions. Adding fractions is easy when you have a common denominator. For example, 3/8 plus 4/8. Here is 3/8 in a picture form, and here is 4/8 in a picture form. When we add them together, the 3/8 moves over to the 4/8, which makes a new fraction. And this fraction is 7/8. There are 7 pieces out of 8 pieces altogether. Here are some more examples. 1/5 plus 2/5. Here is 1/5. Here is 2/5. When we add them together, the numerators, the top numbers, add across. So 1 plus 2. In this case, 1/5 plus 2/5 is equal to 3/5. Here we have 6/10 plus 7/10. Here is 6/10 plus 7/10. Now, if you're looking at adding 6 plus 7, you'll notice that it actually goes to 13/10. Well, how do we represent that? Well, if you remember from your first tutorial, 13/10 is an improper fraction. So when we move over the 5/10 from the 6th and the same, and then the rest of the other pieces, we can see that we have 13/10. And this is an improper fraction. In order to turn this into a mixed number, we notice that we have one whole, because 10/10 equals 1, and we have 3 pieces left over, so the mixed number is 1 and 3/10. So we have 1 whole and 3/10 left over. Adding fractions with different denominators is impossible unless you get them ready first. They will be ready when they have common denominators. So how do we find a common denominator? Well, the lowest common multiple of both numbers is the lowest number in both lists of multiples. So here we have 1/2 plus 1/3. So the multiples of 2 are 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, and so forth. The multiples of 3 are 3, 6, 9, 12, and so forth, on and on. But what is the lowest common multiple between 2 and 3? Well, when we look at the numbers, we can see that 6 actually ends up being the lowest common multiple. They're the It's the lowest number that is the same on both lists of numbers. So here we have the pictorial version of 1/2 plus 1/3. And you can see here that we have 1/2 is gold, and here we have 1/3 is gold. But you can't add fractions with different denominators. And from our previous knowledge, we know that the lowest common multiple of 2 and 3 is 6. So we need to turn all fractions into sixths. And here come our lines dividing up the fractions into sixths. You can see here now that we have 3/6, and we have 2/6 for 1/3. So we have 1/2 times 3 times 3, and just to remind you that this 3/3 is a special form of 1, and all we're doing is making an equivalent fraction, and when you multiply something by 1, it doesn't change how much of it you have in a fraction form. And the same thing with 1/3. 1/3 times 2, which again is the special form of 1. And that equals 3/6, which we saw right here, plus 2/6, which we saw right here, which equals 5/6. And here is 5/6 in a picture format. Here we have 1/2 plus 2/5. Here is our 1/2 in picture form, and 2/5 in picture form here. When we think about what the lowest common multiple of 2 and 5 would be, we know that the lowest common multiple is 10, so that has to be the lowest common denominator as well. So let's make all fractions into tenths. And here we see we have 4/10 here, which as you can see is the same amount as 2/5. And we have 5/10 here, which again, as you can see, is the same fraction that we had, same amount that we had from before with 1/2. They are equivalent fractions. Now the adding is very easy. 5/10 plus 4/10 equals 9/10. Super easy. Here's another example. 1/3 plus 1/4. You can see in the pictures here how we have 1/3 shaded gold, and here 1/4, 1/4 is shaded gold. But what is the lowest common denominator for 1/3 and 1/4? Well, the lowest common denominator in this case is 12. So we need to turn both fractions into twelfths. And here we go. So 1/3, when we turn it into twelfths, turns into 4/12. 1/4 ends up turning into 3/12. Because when we multiply 1/3 times 4/4, which is a special form of 1, because we had to turn it into twelfths, we end up with 4/12. Same thing with 1/4. We split the 1/4 into 3 pieces to make 3/12. So now the addition is very easy. 4/12 plus 3/12 equals 7/12. Ta-da! Okay, here's one last example. 3/7 plus 2/3. Okay, so I need to think. What is the lowest number both 3 and 7 divide into? Okay, so it is 21. So that has to be my common denominator. Okay, so what do I need to do in order to get 21sts? Well, I need a special form of 1 that will change 7 to 21. What will that be? Well, I know that 3 times 7 is 21, so it has to be 3/3 right here. So I simply need to multiply 3/7 by 3/3. That's the special form of 1, and I'm making an equivalent fraction. So 3/3 times 3/7. Okay? So what special form of 1 will change 3 into 21? Well, that would be 7. So 7/7 is what I need to multiply 2/3 in order to get the common denominator of 21. So now 3 times 3 equals 9, right here. 3 times 3 equals 9. And 2 times 7 equals 14. And I know that 3 times 7 equals 21 right there. So now I'm left with 9 21sts, which is the equivalent fraction of 3/7, and 14 21sts, which is the equivalent fraction of 2/3. Now the addition is very easy. 9 plus 14 is 23. And that is an improper fraction, so we have to turn it into a mixed number, which is 1 and 2 21sts. You're done. So adding mixed numbers. When we add mixed numbers, we first need to separate the fraction and the whole number sections. Add those sections separately and then recombine everything at the end. So here is the example that I'm going to show with you. 2½ plus 5 1/3. When we look at this, we have to first take out the whole numbers, so 2 plus 5. Now we need to add the fractions 1/2 and 1/3. So all of this added together will equal our answer of what is 2½ plus 5 1/3. So 2 plus 5 equals 7. And we've already done the 1/2 plus 1/3 in a previous slide. And we know that the common denominator of 1/2 and 1/3 is 6. And we know that 1/2 equals 3/6 and 1/3 equals 2/6. So we know that the answer for what is 1/2 plus 1/3 is 5/6. So our answer then is 7 and 5/6. Okay? Subtracting fractions. The process of subtracting fractions is pretty much the same as adding fractions together. You need to have common denominators in order to subtract properly. Once the denominators are the same, subtraction is easy peasy. Let's look at the cake example that we had from our very first video. Here we have 1/2 of a cake. But let's say, for instance, that I want 1/4 of the cake. All right, so we need to divide this half into quarters. So if I started off with 1/2 of the cake and I ate 1/4 of the original cake, how much of the cake do I have left over? Well, looking at this example, it is pretty easy to see. So we actually end up with 2/4 here, subtract 1/4, and we're left with 1/4 of the original cake left. So of the original cake, half of it was left. If I ate 1/4 of the original cake, I'm left with 1/4 of the original cake in the end. This is a pretty easy example. Let's look at this. So here we have 1/2 subtract 1/3. Here is 1/2. Here is 1/3. Well, I can't subtract 1/3 from 1/2 without turning the denominators the same. So You can't subtract fractions with different denominators. It's impossible. The lowest common multiple of 2 and 3 is 6, as we know, so turn all fractions into sixths. And here we go. Ta-da. So now, the equivalent fraction of 1/2 is 3/6. The equivalent fraction of 1/3 is 2/6. So, here we've multiplied by the special form of 1. Again, remember, the special form of 1 does not change the fraction. It only changes the numbers, but the fraction is exactly the same. And the special form of 1 for this side is 2 seconds. Okay, so 2 times 3, 6. 1 times 3, 3. 3 times 2, 6. And 1 times 2, 2. So 3/6 minus 2/6 equals 1/6. Here we have 1/3 minus 1/4. And once again, without a common denominator, we cannot do the subtraction. It is impossible. We need to turn both fractions into twelfths. And here we go. Here is 1/3 in a fraction, which is 4/12, and the same thing with 1/4, which is 3/12. And now the subtraction is super easy. 4/12 minus 3/12 equals 1/12. Ta-da. Here are some final points about adding and subtracting fractions. Adding and subtracting fractions is just as easy as adding and subtracting whole numbers once you have a common denominator. Just remember that once you have a common denominator, you only add or subtract the numerators. You may also have to reduce the answer to its lowest terms depending on what kind of an answer you get. Likewise, if you get a mixed number, or I should say an improper fraction, you have to end up with a mixed number at the end. Okay, that is it. You have finished part 2 of fractions, adding and subtracting. Take some time to practice with your parents, adding and subtracting fractions on your own, and we will see you in class. Good luck!